Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I will be talking about my February wrap-up, all of the books that I read in the month of February. And February was not as great a reading month as I had in January. I read less books. I only had one DNF, which was great, but I did not find a new 5-star favorite. But I still read some great books. I read some kind of meh books, kind of an unbalanced month. Like I read some stuff that I really enjoyed, and then I read some stuff that I really did not get along with. So, hopefully March will be better, but for this video, I'm going to talk about all the stuff that I attempted to read in February. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first off, let's get that pesky DNF out of the way. And this one was probably the most surprising. Like out of all of the books, I wasn't expecting to DNF this one, but I DNF'd The One by John Mars. This book just, I think John Mars, I mentioned him in my One Hit Wonders video, One Hit Wonders authors video, because so far I've attempted to read 3 of his books. I really enjoyed The Passengers. I didn't really like Keep It in the Family, and then now I've DNF'd The One. I'm sure I'm going to read more by him. I'm going to read The Vacation this month in March, so hopefully that one is a lot better. The One, I really like the concept of like, basically you take a DNA test and it's supposed to configure your perfect ideal like love match, which that premise sounded really good, but the execution of it, I just didn't really like. You guys know at this point, I really don't like short, choppy chapters. This book is relatively short and it has like 100 chapters and it's just kind of broken up. There's like 5 or 6 different storylines that are happening. For me, I think I would have enjoyed it more if it was kind of more like he tells like one story and then one story and then one, but it was just like you get a tiny little section of this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then this one, this one, this one, this one. It was just like it was too much, and I didn't really like the structure of it. And surprisingly enough, I was really only enjoying one of the storylines. A lot of them I just didn't really find that compelling. So for me, this was a fairly quick DNF. I think I DNF'd it at the 20-25% mark. Maybe if I would have stuck with it, I would have loved the ending, but I just didn't really get along with the structure of it, or really the story, frankly. So sadly, I DNF'd The One by John Mars. Okay, so we got that DNF out of the way. Only one DNF for February, so we're doing good so far for DNFs in 2025. Only 2 of them. But sadly enough, that DNF was not the most egregiously disappointing book of the month. That would have to go to Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail because I do have a rant review for y'all. If you haven't seen that yet, I go into like spoiler-filled details about why this is one of the worst thrillers I've ever read. You can tell from the thumbnail, like worst thriller of all time? Potentially, because this book was extremely disappointing. I really liked Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney, and then His and Hers was okay. So I was expecting good things from this book. And it started out good enough. I liked the premise, but then the further on you get, like the last 15 to 10% of this book, we get so many stupid reveals. And I'm not going to spoil it for y'all. Just go check out the video or read the book if you want to, but I do not recommend it. The ending just sucked. Plain and simple. I gave this book 2 stars. I would have given it lower, but the writing was really good, and I was intrigued by the main character initially. So it started out well enough. It was just basically the last 10% of it that just ruined it. So, yeah, this book sucked. Probably contender for worst book that I've read in 2025. We'll see how the year goes, but, like, it's definitely going to be on the list for sure, because this book sucked. Another really disappointing book was actually a book that I reread, And that was a book that we read for the Stephen King Book Club, run by myself and Ian from Ian the Reader. And our pick for February was From a Buick 8. Now, I was interested in rereading this book because I remembered somewhat enjoying it when I first read it way back in like 2017 when I was reading all of Stephen King stuff. I thought this book was underrated. Like, I initially gave it 3.5 stars. I kind of forgotten some bits about it, but in the back of my mind, I was like, this book is underrated. Like, I liked it. So I was interested to get everyone's opinion, including Ian, because he hadn't read this book before. So I wanted to include this because I kind of wanted to reread it just to see like where it sat in my ranking. And sadly, I enjoyed it a lot less the second time around. I gave this book 2.5 stars this time. My two main problems with it is that it's too long, which you can tell it's not even that long of a book. It's like 400 some pages, but really this book should have been a novella. Like if you would have took this same concept and made it a novella, I think it would have had more impact. But with its length, it just gets kind of repetitive and just kind of bland at times. And my other main criticism is that none of the characters are really that great. And Stephen King, like even with his bad books, there's always a character that I can grab onto and really like get sucked into the story like with just at least one or two characters. But for this one, none of the characters are that great. They're all kind of bland, which is very rare for Stephen King. If you're interested, I'd go into a lot more detail in my book review here, so definitely check that out. I'll link it down below. But basically, my reread was very disappointing. A lot of people that read it with us did not like it. We had, I think, one or two people that somewhat enjoyed it. But overall, this is one of Stephen King's worst books, in my opinion, and I gave it 2.5 stars. And speaking of disappointments in February, we also have A Killing Cold by Kate Alice Marshall. This was her new book that came out, I think, in either January or February. And I was stoked to read this book because I really enjoyed the previous books that I read by her. But unfortunately, this is the third book that I've read by her, and this was by far my least favorite and my most disappointed. And honestly, like, I can't even really remember much about the book. Like, it was very forgettable. The plot wasn't, now it's all starting to come back to me. This is all about like a woman who's wanting to marry this really rich guy, and she goes to visit his family, and they kind of have a little get together, and then there's some stuff that's revealed. It's one of those kind of books. And really, there just wasn't that much interesting things that happened in this book. There's a little bit at the end that kind of like raised it a little bit. Like, if it wasn't for the ending, this book would have gotten like 2.5 stars. But really, this book just didn't have great characters or a great story, which is what I look forward to with Kate Alice Marshall books. This one was by far her worst book, most disappointing. Hopefully with her next book, she can kind of go back to what I liked in What Lies in the Woods. I really enjoyed that book, but this one was just kind of a bummer, and I gave it 3 stars. This next book I also gave 3 stars, but I wouldn't really call it a disappointment because I wasn't really expecting to love this book, but I thought it was kind of just okay. And I'm, of course, talking about Crime and Punishment by an author that I'm not going to try to pronounce. It's supposed to be like a Russian classic written in like the 1800s. I've wanted to read this for a long time, but just never really found an opportunity. But a lot of people in the Discord, Booker's Drummer Discord, which I'll link down below, wanted to read this in February. So I said, why not make it a read-along or a buddy read? So we did that, and I will say a lot of people did end up really enjoying this book. But for me, it started out well enough, but it just kept going on and on and on and on. Like this book, like classics can sometimes do that, where they just feel unnecessarily long, and really not much happens in this book. Like, it's Crime and Punishment. Like, this guy does a crime, and then kind of the whole book, he's kind of just paranoid about the crime and like, is he going to get caught or not? Like, that's basically the book. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but like, I didn't love the writing. Like, it's classic writing. I'm not the biggest fan of usually. It can work. Like, you know, Picture of Dorian Gray, I love. Frankenstein, I love. But this book, it was okay. Like, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It's fine. 3 stars. This next book is a thriller that I was a little bit worried about reading, but it ended up being pretty good. Not great, not terrible, but pretty good. And that would be One by One by Frida McFadden. And like I mentioned, I was really worried because I read one of her other thrillers. I can't even remember the title, but I'll put it here. I really did not like it. Gave it 2 stars. One of the worst. Never Lie. That's what it is. One of the worst thrillers I've ever read. I really did not get along with it. So I was worried to try one of her other standalones because she has a ton. And of course, I really like The Housemaid, like that series. But luckily enough, this one was pretty good. Not the best thing I ever read, but I had a good time with it. It's got a decent enough setup where you've got basically this group of, I think, like 6 people. And like the title suggests, one by one, kind of go missing or end up dead. So it was pretty good. Kind of the reveal at the end was a little dumb, but it was fun. All the characters are kind of dislikable, but in a fun way. Like they're all just kind of nutty, stupid people, but it was fine. So I will probably check out more by her. If I read another one that's like not really that great or just terrible, I might just stop reading her standalones. But overall, this one was pretty good and gives me a little sliver of hope that her books will be better in the future. So this one was 3.5 stars. Next book I thought was pretty good, but not quite on par with her previous debut novel that I really enjoyed. And that would be The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. I was super pumped to read this book because she's the same author as The Push, which is one of my all-time favorite novels, debut novel, in fact. And this was her sophomore effort, and I thought it was good, like pretty good. I gave it 4 stars, but it was nowhere near the same level as The Push. This one, I think its problem is that it's got too, like The Push was kind of more of a focus novel where you're kind of focusing on one, well, not one, but like kind of one family. And like you have a main character, like the main woman. But for this one, you're kind of focusing on 4 different families and 4 different sets of problems. And they're kind of jumping back and forth between like not even just those stories, but different timelines, in fact. So you got like 8 different timelines. And this book is relatively short. It's like only 300 pages. I just don't think, like, this book should have been longer. It's one of those rare books where I wish it was longer. Like, just to have more time to explore the intricacies of the plot and how everything kind of wraps up. I will say the very ending of the book was very good. And the writing was on par with The Push. I just don't think the structure and execution of the book was the best it could have been. But overall, I did have a good time with it, and I'm hopeful to read more by this author, and hopefully her next books will be on the same level as The Push. This one was pretty good, 4 stars. Probably not a book that I would ever go back to reread, but I would recommend it. Next book I have to talk about was my Patreon pick for the month, and if you're unaware, I do have a Patreon, and every month I do a Patreon wheel spin, and whoever wins gets to pick a book for me to read the following month. And you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. And the winner for the month of March was Dyslexicon, and the book that he wanted me to read was Demon Copperhead by Barbara, oh God, what's her last name? Kingsolver. And this book was surprisingly good. I went into this book not really knowing much about it and with kind of lowered expectations, and I pretty much enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I would have gotten higher, but I think the first 80% of this book was really good. And then the last 20% kind of focused on stuff that I didn't really care about. And then the ending didn't really have an ending. It just kind of ended, if that makes any sense. But yeah, this book was pretty good. Very solid first-person POV. And I think kind of the thing that draws a lot of people to this, it's supposed to be kind of a modern retelling of, oh God, it's that Charles Dickens novel. I can't remember the name. David Copperfield, that's what it is. It's supposed to be kind of a modern retelling, and it's a guy who kind of grows up in like West Virginia and kind of has some weird stuff happen to him. It was really good up until like the last 20%. Like I mentioned, really solid first person POV and some fun stuff. At some points, he travels to different places in Virginia where I visited. And yeah, it was a lot of fun in that sense. This book is very funny at times, very heartwarming at times, very depressing and just sad at times. And overall, the writing was really good and outstanding. But yeah, I had a really good time with it. Just the very ending didn't really like if it would have stuck the landing, this book would have been like a 4.5, 5-star book. But overall, very good. I can definitely see the hype for this book being real. So I definitely recommend this book, and I gave it 4 stars. Next book I have to talk about is a fun little horror book that I read that I gave 4 stars to, and that would be Burn the Negative by Josh Winning. This basically just reads like a really good horror movie, which is fitting because the plot of this revolves around kind of a fake horror movie. It's kind of the trope of like cursed horror movies. Like in real life, there are some cursed horror movies where like during the filming or after the filming is wrapped up, actors and people involved in the movies kind of mysteriously get injured during the filming or die in some weird way. Like The Exorcist had some stuff like that. Poltergeist is one of the most famous ones. And in this one, we have kind of well, in the book it's real, but like a fake movie, and a bunch of people mysteriously passed away in really distinct ways, like their characters died in the movie. So, but we're following a character that was in the movie, but they're still alive, and she's decided to stay out of the spotlight and just kind of disappear, change her name. And everyone's been wondering like where she's been, like is she dead, like what's happening. And we're following her story years and years later, where someone is kind of filming like a documentary about the making of the sequel of this movie or something like that. And it kind of involves her, and then mysteriously people are dying again, so she's trying to figure out what's going on. So this book was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the main character. I loved the pacing, and the end of the book I think actually stuck it pretty well. So yeah, overall, not the best thing I've ever read, but if you're looking for a really fun horror book with some fun kind of horror movie trivia attached to it, Burn the Negative is very good. 4 stars. Next book I have to talk about is You Know What You Did by K.T. Gwynn, I think is how you pronounce it. And this was kind of a random thriller that was chosen for me to read because every month on the Bookish Tournament Discord, I do a random number generator game, and whoever gets the closest between a random number between 1 and 100 gets to pick a book from my Goodreads TBR. And the winner was Stacy, not my wife, but other Stacy, and she chose this book, which I was a little hesitant, but also very excited. It has a very low rating on Goodreads, and I was kind of wondering why that was. A lot of the times, like y'all probably know, a lot of my favorite thrillers and horror books have low Goodreads ratings, so I was expected kind of to love this book just because that just seemed to be what I love. But this book, what kind of drew me in immediately was the writing and just the kind of the doom and gloom, very disturbing. This book reminded me a lot of how Zoe Stage writes, because she does write horror, but a lot of the times it's more specifically like psychological thriller, where you're kind of just in the mind, in the shoes of this character, and they're going through a lot. And this book has a woman who's really struggling with OCD tendencies, and she's also dealing with the death of her mother, and then some other things are happening just all at once, and you're kind of following just her just paranoid state of mind throughout this whole book. And the writing was really good, the characters were really good. I was loving this book, and for a long time I thought this was going to be like 4.5 stars at least, and then potentially, if it ended really well, 5 stars. But sadly enough, this book was kind of disappointing in that, like I mentioned, it was very much Zoe Stage like, where like very psychological thriller, really intense, disturbing stuff. And then kind of like the last 5%, the author just kind of decides to turn it into a generic thriller ending. And I really didn't like that. Like, I really didn't love how the story wrapped up. So for that reason, I settled on 4 stars, because the writing was really good, the characters were really good, the psychological thriller aspects of this book were just top notch. Just the ending really disappointed me. Like, it was just took all of that and then just kind of turned it into a generic thriller ending, where I'm just like, really? Like, that's how you're going to end it? So sadly enough, 4 stars. This could have been a new favorite, but it is what it is. And now I have two 4.5-star fantasy reads that are new to me. I do have one 5-star read, but it was a reread. I'll settle that for the end. No new 5-star or no new 5-star reads. So no books that I've read for the first time that have gotten 5 stars. But like I said, two 5.5-star, or not 5.5, 4.5-star reads that I thought were excellent, and they're both fantasy books. So the first one I'll talk about is The Bard's Blade by Brian D. Anderson. I did a random random wheel spin just to kind of pick a random book from my shelves here, and this was the book that was chosen for me randomly, and I really liked it. It's the first book in I can't remember what the series title is. I'll put it here, but it was really good, and it's weird. It reminded me a lot at the beginning of like Name of the Wind, and the further on in the story it gets, it's what I wanted Name of the Wind to be, if that makes any sense. Because at the beginning of the story, you're following a musician who's kind of just living his life as a musician. He's got a girlfriend, and they're kind of having strifes because like he doesn't know if he should stay a musician or just live with her on her farm and work for her father, kind of a more serious job and like that kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden, there's a lot to explain, but like in the beginning of the book, you kind of learn that this whole land that they live in is like magically protected by like some kind of magical force field, and like no one can leave and no one can enter. So like they're very safe among themselves. But here comes this random dude who no one has seen. And like it's the first time in like a couple hundred years that someone's passed through, and he gives this musician kind of this dire warning of like, you have to come like save the world or else we're all gonna die. And he goes, and it's kind of following two storylines of like him leaving and then the girlfriend following him because she's confused, like what's happening, I gotta go find my love. So it read like very kind of classic fantasy tropes of like, it's very light fantasy, like it's not that dark, it may be dark at times, but it's kind of a lighter fantasy, but with really good writing. Like, because I don't really like classic fantasy writing stuff, like the prose in that. But this book was really good, very well paced. Really liked the characters, really liked the magic, and overall, it's just a very fun start to a fantasy trilogy. And that's another thing. Name of the Wind, that whole trilogy not finished, but this one's already finished. And yeah, I gave this book 4.5 stars. Very promising, and I can't wait to read the second book. I'm gonna plan to try to read that in April during Battle of the Bands readathon, but we'll see. But yeah, this first book was extremely good. And my other 4.5-star fantasy read was a sequel to a book that I've now read twice, and I liked this book basically just as much as the first book, and that would be Priest of Lies by Peter McLean. This is the sequel to Priest of Bones and the second book in the War for the Rose Throne series. Now, like I mentioned, last year I had read the first book and then I planned on continuing the series, but that didn't happen. So this year, started in January with the first book, and I'm going to do one book a month up until the last book in April. So I read the second book in February. Also gave this book 4.5 stars, same rating as the first book. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Loved Thomas Piety, getting more of him. And we're starting to get a little bit more of the other characters. Like in the first book, kind of my main complaint is that I love Thomas Piety, but like the other characters are kind of just there. Like I don't really get a full grasp of them. In this book, we get a bit more of them, which is great. But at the same time, this book is a little bit slower, but still really good. Like overall, this series, I don't know if it's going to be like an all-time favorite, but all of these books so far are like very solid 4.5-star reads. And I can't wait to continue with the series with the third book, Priest of Gallows, in March. Very excited for that. I've heard that's also a bit of a slow burn, but we'll see. And then, of course, my only 5-star read for the month. I did not have any new 5-star reads, but going into this book, I already knew it was going to be 5 stars. And that's, of course, Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, the second book in the Gentleman Bastard series, the sequel to The Lies of Locke Lamora. And, of course, I already knew it was going to be 5 stars. All the books in the series are 5 stars. I think it's a very competent sequel. A lot of people might disagree and think that, Lies of Locke Lamora is awesome, and then kind of books 2 and 3 are maybe not bad, but like a little bit lower. But for me, they're all great. They all kind of tell their distinct stories. And this one, if you couldn't tell, does have a bit of a nautical theme. And this book, like the first, like all the books, they have laugh out loud moments. And it's rare for a fantasy series to get me to like laugh out loud several times. But this book in this series, Locke and John just get into more Locke and John hijinks, and it's just really fun. There's some heartbreaking moments in here, and there's just some really just outstanding dialogue as always. Like, I just love these books. So no surprise from me or from anyone who knows me, 5 stars. All right, so that is my February wrap up, all of the books that I read in February. So I managed to finish 12 books, and I DNF'd 1 book. A little less than January, but my excuse is that there's less days in February, so there you go. But also, I did not have any 5-star reads that were new to me. The only one was Red Seas Under Red Skies, which is a reread. But I am happy to announce that in March, I already have a 5-star read new to me. You might be able to guess what it is if you're on the Bookish Drummer Discord. But I'm hoping to continue that streak and hopefully find some more 5-star favorites in March. I've also not DNF'd any books yet in March. There'll probably be one, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm expecting March to be a very good reading month. And then, of course, if you guys haven't seen the video yet, in April, we're going to be doing Battle of the Bands Readathon, which will take place exclusively on the Bookish Drummer Discord. So go sign up for that using the link down below. We're going to have a great time. And yeah, go check out that video too if you haven't already. And go check out my wife's video where we talk about recommendations for all the various prompts in the readathon. I'll link that below as well. But enough about that. What did you guys think of the books that I read in February? Have you read any of them? Did you like them? Did you dislike them? Did you think any of them were meh? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, what were your favorite books that you read in the month of February? I'd love to chat with you about it down in the comments below. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and continue to subscribe for more content. Like I mentioned, Bookish Drummer Discord, where we've got tons of read-alongs and buddy reads. We keep piling them on here, and hopefully y'all enjoy them. I've also got the Patreon link down below if you want to go support me there for as little as $1 a month, and my Amazon wishlist if you'd like to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a fantastic day. So for this video, I will be discussing my March wrap-up, all of the books that I read or DNF'd in the month of March. Or not March, the hell am I talking about?